Hello and welcome to today's Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. I'm Jason Rader. I'll be your host today as we talk about SAP implementation, strategies for change management. And our experts who are joining us today are Michelle Sneed, Director of Performance Consulting with us here at Insight. Welcome, Michelle.
Hey there.
And we have David Gall. Oh, sorry about that, Michelle. We have David Gall, Senior Performance Consultant with us here at Insight as well. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Hello.
So, what brings us here today? So, from an SAP perspective, let's kind of set the landscape, because as we were kind of prepping for this, we talked about even since January, there's been some changes in the landscape, if you will. Why don't you kind of bring us up to speed, David, on what's going on right now?
Yeah. So, long story short, the pressure is on. Here we are at the end of 2024. People have been talking about the approaching deadline from SAP to migrate from legacy business suite systems, the tool that they've been offering for 15, 20 years in one form or another, to S/4HANA. The deadline is and has remained for a while now, 2027. It sounds like a little flexibility around extended support through 2030, but at significant additional expense. So organizations that want to make the deadline and have not started now are in a position where they really need to think about getting the ball rolling. And while ERP is a mature technology, I think SAP America was established about 35 years ago, right around the same time as the earliest S4 implementations. ERP implementations remain challenging, even with all of the learning from many decades of doing this now. You still will see stories about organizations that have gone live and have had failed implementations or material financial impacts because they've struggled as they go live. So it's definitely an area that, from an IT and a strategic business perspective, needs to be taken very seriously.
Sounds like it. I know that's all we've been talking about internally as well. We've got our own ERP situation that we're trying to sort out and figuring out the appropriate path. In an organization that's almost as old as SAP, there can be a lot of complexities there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've been doing this almost as long as SAP has been here in the US, and there's been a gradual awareness that I think has grown. Initially, everyone understood this to be a system project. There was no understanding of what change management was. And so that was an often painful learning process all by itself. I think there's general awareness of the importance of change management. But in recent years, as focus has moved towards the cloud and towards sort of business best practices implementations, where you don't do a lot of customization, you do as little configuration as possible, and you try to migrate your organization to the system rather than shoehorning the system into the way you already work. I think that it's made the change management task more challenging, which ties into the overall success or implementation. And it's also, I think, exposed a gap, if you will. We've always thought about the technical side of the implementation and the change management side of the implementation, but we're increasingly seeing gaps that form around the inputs to change management. So if you're configuring the system a certain way, you're bringing new capabilities to the business, how are people actually going to use those from a business process perspective? That's not always part of the roadmap that the system integrator brings to the table. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's challenging for the SI to help the customer along in those efforts, because the system integrator knows the system, the customer does not. The customer knows their current business, but nobody knows what the new business looks like enabled by that system. So I think it's created a gap, because understanding how the business is really going to run, how people's day-to-day lives are going to work, is a key input to the change management piece. And if there's no planning in the process, in the project, you don't have anyone on the hook to figure that out in addition to the configuration, it can make successful change management difficult, even if you have all the right parts in place, because you don't have that input.
And David, I would chime in and say these projects are much more than just SAP or an ERP implementation. I think we're seeing broader transformational change, right? This results in shifts to, cloud technologies, different tool sets, different skills, different team structures from IT, and quite frankly, ERP landscape has matured, right? There's lots of integration points. We're not just talking about SAP anymore. We're integrating, PLM systems, warehouse management systems. There's just a lot more involved. And so an S4HANA project is, yes, it's impactful to, the workforce and how we're running the business, but it's much, much bigger than that. And we need to be thinking about it like that too.
Oh, well put.
Absolutely.
I think it's, as you were talking about that, I think you very well said, both of you. I think of, a lot of folks get wrapped around the axle from this is a tech situation that we have to, from now in 2024, we've got to do this by 2027, or it's going to cost a lot more. But they kind of rally the tech folks and maybe the people in charge of the different business applications that they've got currently, and they'll have this tech discussion, to your point, David. And then they'll think they bring change management in 2027 when they're about to roll this out. And I think that's probably a big mistake. So when is a good time to engage a solutions integrator if you're thinking about this journey, even from a change management perspective? And I think you alluded to it, but I wanted a more kind of specific answer.
Yeah. So I would say earlier than you would suspect, and indeed earlier than we would have traditionally got involved as change management consultants. There was a time when the change management and the training team would come in, sort of towards the end of realization. You had a lot of your design in place. It was time to start your configuration process and building out your communications plan, and you're starting training development based on the design that you've created. We're finding that there's a growing need for engagement early on around project team training, right? Trying to close that gap where you have consultants that know the system and project team members that don't, and are being asked by the system integrator, all right, here are your three options for how you're going to implement your shipment orders. Which one of these looks good? If you don't have a background in SAP, you don't know the implications of making that decision that you'll find out 6 months from now. That makes it's really hard, right? It puts pressure on your project team, and it also greatly increases the risk that when the light goes off 6 months from now, you'll realize that you made the wrong choice, or made a choice that's going to have other consequences that you hadn't anticipated.
And
We
David,
also, yeah, please.
Sorry. I would also say too, I think we're seeing engagement even sooner than project team training, right? We're seeing it at the decision at the hyperscaler, right? So is it GCP? Is it AWS? Is it Microsoft? How are we making sure that those technologies are incorporated into our strategy? And for many of our smaller customers, even some of our public sector customers, they're even struggling with figuring out who is the right SI, right? How do we make sure that we're giving them the information to come back and tell us what we really need? And so we're engaging at different levels, I think, than we ever have been. And I think it's because people are recognizing that this is a transformation. SAP sometimes is called a technical upgrade. But it's much more than that. And I think we're seeing people starting our services before, in some cases, the project has even started. And I think that's a unique difference than we've seen in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. One of the advantages that we have is we're not tied to a specific system integrator. We work across the industry. We support the underlying technologies that they all use. And so, we've been involved in ERP selection, helping customers, giving customers an objective perspective on, which of these options is likely to get us what we need from a business perspective. And then also getting involved in figuring out what is your existing business process, with a mind to setting up the project plan and working with the system integrator from the beginning in incorporating, being able to get the answers to the question, how is my life going to change? What's my job going to be? which really requires understanding both what your job is like now, and then what's the effect that the system is going to have on it. So that's work that can often happen, phase 0, if you will, or even pre-phase 0 as groundwork to make sure that you have the right foundation before you even start, pulling the levers to change things.
I think that's a good point. So when you said transformation, Michelle, I don't know, I love the word. I think a lot of folks, when they say transformation in their organization, they think that maybe there's a group that is doing it right and everybody should just do it the same way that that group is. But what I found is most people don't realize everybody gets to change in a transformation. And that's hard for people to believe or to consider until they're kind of right in the middle of it, I think. But so that kind of brings up the next question, like, what's the right team composition for something like this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. You're absolutely right, Jason. So there's a lot that goes into this word transformation, right? We have project management teams. We certainly have, project governance and structure, and people need to know new ways of working, whether that be, an agile implementation. So there's changes at the project structure level. There's changes at the IT level. We are asking people to have different skills, whether it's S/4HANA, whether it's the hyperscaler, it could be a data tool, data ingestion tools. It's all different when it's time to come from an SAP perspective. And when we talk about transformation, especially kind of moving to the cloud, there's different expectations for teammates and how things are structured, and we focus on different things. Maybe it's things like, FinOps, where we're transitioning how we think about, consumption or the things that, we're doing holistically on a project. So those happen in addition to typically each person's job, right? There's new screens, there's new ways of using the technology. There's often new business processes because, quite frankly, the scenario with kind of the implementation approach that we have today is we're trying to use things out of the box. So doing that means, right, you have to change everything that you're doing currently. Even for someone like an Insight, when I think about potentially having to move towards, an out of the box system based on what we have from years past, it's not a small step, and we know that. And truthfully, there's even external change, right? We're seeing change, from partners, from vendors, from suppliers. They will see some of the transformation as well. We have a customer right now that's very focused on, kind of an outward portal for their customers that are all associated to SAP. So it's outreach beyond just the four walls or kind of the organization that we're in. So it's really transformation at, all levels. And unfortunately, it's not the same for any one company, right? Because we're all starting somewhere different.
No, that's a big bet especially if it's customer facing. You can really, if you're not paying attention, that can really have a big impact, one that you hadn't planned if you were only thinking of the tech.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, David. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, from the standpoint of your change management team, what we're seeing increasing traction is leveraging hybrid consultants who wear both a change management and a training hat, because successful training incorporates your change management messages, and successful change management sort of tees up your training effort. It will lay the groundwork. It will share early information. You'll often have the high level, why are we doing this? What does SAP S/4HANA look like? That sort of training really as more of a communication message in some cases. And so we can deploy a team that has expertise in training and change management, sometimes business process, so as to be able to actually help the customer with business process documentation as an input to the change management process. And then these consultants they're not just traditional training consultants, but they're also experts in tools, right? So we have tools like SAP Enable Now or WalkMe, which is now an SAP product, or WhatFix. These are tools that are designed to be used not only as training tools during go live, but also to form the backbone of your user support effort once you've gone live. Because what you don't want to do is, spend the level of focus and investment that is required to do change management right for go live, and then take everything that you produced and put it on a shelf or in a box somewhere. And as your organization continues to evolve over 3 or 4 years, you discover that all of the training content that you created is now out of date because life changes. So we talk a lot about the importance of sustainment and ensuring that you're not just planning for go live, but you think of go live as the starting line, not the finish line with these projects. The project itself is sort of the preamble, and you set up the necessary elements within not just your technology and your process, but also in your people, and ensuring that you have a plan in place for training people on an ongoing basis, for ongoing user support, for ensuring that when your business process changes because you just acquired a company 2 years after you've gone live, that there's some way of incorporating the changes in people's daily life and communicating those and upskilling the necessary people so that it's all taken into account.
So you mentioned training a lot. There's a nuance between performance support versus training, right?
Yep, absolutely. So we think of training as the upskilling itself. So providing the knowledge, skills, and abilities to go from what you knew before you knew anything about S4 to being able to efficiently and effectively use it as a tool to run the business. And ultimately, your goal for implementing an ERP should be that your business is going to be even better than it was before, right? Yes, there's an SAP deadline, but we try to think of these things as an opportunity to improve, not just a requirement that we're being forced to, medicine we're being forced to take. So
that's good consultancy.
Yeah, exactly. And so from a user perspective, that's the training is getting up to that initial level. Performance support then is what can we do so that as you continue to work or as changes are made to the system, that there's some formal process in place to let you know. Like SAP Enable Now, which is their now legacy, I guess, knowledge management product, has a component called Companion, which integrates with S/4HANA itself, and it essentially lets you add a layer of information over the top of the user interface for S4, so that if someone is new to the system, or if, let's say, your roles change, and so users have access to a new app that they've never used before, you can have a notification pop up letting them know that it's there, pointing it out, saying, hey, do you need to know how to use this app? Click this link. You can show them a video. You can provide them with work instructions, right? There's a whole series of things that you can do, none of which requires formal training per se, so that even your users that you've already gotten up to speed as things continue to evolve, you're not in the situation where they become less effective over time because the system has moved away from what they know.
And David, I would say too, I mean, we live in an instant gratification culture, right? We're Googling, we're YouTubing. With the emergence of AI, we're using chatbots and Copilot in everything we do. And so if I'm a system user, it's really important in that moment when I don't know what to do, or the path to, getting things to move through the system is unclear. My expectation is it's coming at point of need, right? And so it really is important that in our solutions from a change and training perspective, we're delivering that in the moment support, whether it be inline help. A lot of the tools that we leverage to develop training content, et cetera, are really performance support tools that are, I think, high value for most of our customers. Because truthfully, we're seeing, David mentioned a lot of M&A activity. And because of that, it's not a scenario where we can do all of these things today and baseline everybody for tomorrow, because tomorrow it could be a whole different set of users that we have to make sure can adopt the use of our technology to manage our business processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great point.
And Michelle mentioned chatbots there in passing. So something that we haven't really touched on yet, but kind of in the technology space, a potential sea change that we'll potentially be seeing over the next year, perhaps, in the change management space. SAP has announced SAP Joule, which is their chatbot, their take on generative AI, which is a hot topic in the technology space in general, with companies like ChatGPT and Microsoft investing a lot of money in these technologies. SAP is starting to move down that path as well. And generative AI is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's not a one size fits all solution to all your problems necessarily. And using it effectively requires an understanding of how generative AI works. How do you prompt to get the best results possible? We haven't seen a lot of Joule implementations thus far, so it's hard to say, what can the tool do? Where does it struggle? All of these tools tend to have strengths and weaknesses. And so I think going forward, something that we're going to be incorporating into our overall approach is not only how do we leverage generative AI as an aid to actually developing content, but then how do we train and coach the end users to use the generative AI tools that are part of SAP to maximum possible use? Because in the future, maybe something that would have required running a complicated transaction, now you'll be able to take care of with a few prompts in a chat box. So it's sort of a wide open field in terms of how that's going to change things. We'll have to kind of make that journey together. We're already working on the problem.
Oh, that's great. As somebody who's a big AI enthusiast, I think, and because I've seen great changes in our own organization related to it, I think that from a OCM perspective and user acceptance perspective, specifically leveraging AI that can watch how people use the system and then, help you make suggestions, I think is something that, we've only scratched the surface. Typically what we're using generative AI for right now is just to kind of deal with a repository of data that we want to pull and give coherent answers back to that would save somebody a lot of time. But I see as it watches people work, there's even a better opportunity on the horizon that we can do some even cooler stuff. So
yeah, that's absolutely true. And SAP has said, this is just the first taste. All of the big vendors, there have been breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs that have made these tools possible just in the last couple of years. And everybody from Microsoft to Apple to SAP to Oracle, they are all racing to figure out how can we make the best possible use of these tools. And as they're doing that, the tools themselves become more capable. And as they have more time to build more hooks into the system, you can get them to do more things. So it's a potentially very powerful, very exciting tool. But at the end of the day, all of ERP, including the AI, is a tool. And to actually translate the investment in that tool into a more successful business that's able to pursue market opportunities more effectively and an efficient, effective workforce, that requires training and selling the solution, reassuring people, managing resistance, all the things that change management involves.
Yeah. And earlier we were talking about sorry, I completely lost my train of thought, but I know where I was going. So this is not some insignificant project. I don't know that any ERP or SAP anything is something that isn't associated with a significant investment in the organization. I remember where I was going. So most organizations, when they're making that kind of investment, I think to your earlier point, David, most organizations have this expectation, not that it's going to be exactly the same as it was implemented, but it needs to be able to scale and grow with the organization. I think all the more reason to incorporate, strategic consultant related to how that's going to happen and allow it to prepare that way. But now, since we're already talking about, I had mentioned the big budget associated with these, is there some kind of nuance related to budgeting from you folks' perspective that we should probably talk about?
Yeah, I think that overall what we're seeing to some extent is an under budgeting scenario. We really need to make sure you know, a lot of times what we're hearing is the words technical upgrade. Um,
Yep.
there is the notion of it being a technical upgrade, but what we can't lose sight of is that it's still a significant change at the user level, right? Implementing technology off the shelf, out of the box, quite frankly, then, as I mentioned before, is driving net new business process changes. So to some extent, it's not necessarily about how we're actually going to use the system, right? Not the point, click, drag, drop. Quite frankly, it's how is this different than what you're doing tomorrow? How does it integrate with other systems, et cetera? And so for us, I think there is this notion of it being under budgeted, right? When we're terming things like technical upgrade, we're losing sight of, you know, kind of what really needs to be done. I also think too that we're seeing customers not budgeting for training delivery. For those of us that live in the change management world, there is so much effort that goes into content development and preparing. But quite frankly, what our users see is that training delivery, right? Their instructor who has knowledge, et cetera. And we're seeing a lot of shortchanging of that as well. We get to an end of a project and a customer will say, hey, we don't have trainers. What do we do? Or we're putting the wrong people in front of the user base. So I think in general, we're seeing light budgeting. You know, we're seeing budgeting kind of on the core. And I think training is becoming an afterthought, which I think we have to rethink that. We have to make sure that we're allowing the time and effort associated with that.
Yeah, the traditional metric for, you know, the rule of thumb for how much should you invest, how much should you budget for change management relative to the rest of your project is 15 to 20%. And I think that's probably reasonable, but there's two elements that simple figure misses. One of which is, I think, part of the challenge that companies are seeing isn't just budgeting of money, but of time, planning sufficient time in your timeline. And of course, the pressure against this gets greater and greater as we get closer to 2027. But not planning sufficient time to figure out what you're going to need as an input to your training. You know, how are people's jobs actually going to change? Michelle mentioned that this isn't a technical upgrade, and that's absolutely true. You can, you know, in theory, you can take a business suite system and you can pick it up and you can stick it on an S4 on a HANA database. They call it a brownfield implementation, where you're just essentially moving on to faster technology. But you're spending, you know, if you're spending millions of dollars on your project, and in a lot of cases, organizations are coming off of ERPs or legacy systems that are already 20 years old, you're missing a huge opportunity if you were to try that, to not doing things to optimize your business, right? Migrating a lot of what you do now on paper or via fax, you know, heaven help anyone that's still using a fax machine when you could be using EDI. But implementing EDI requires coordination with your suppliers or your customers. It requires a change to your internal processes that you may not understand. It requires training people. So all of that has to be taken into account. And I think that figuring out that business process piece that's not part of that 15 to 20%, and it's not even technically part of change management, but it really is. It's successful. It's an important part of the overall success of one of these projects, and it will give your change management partner and your internal change management team the tools they need to succeed.
I will argue that the gold nugget of change management in a situation like this is the forcing function of the questions that you ask of when you're trying to accomplish it, that makes the organization look at their processes and realize we've got a lot of re-engineering to do, because they just thought, you know, and it's kind of human nature, right? We're going to do this thing that we've always done, and this system's basically going to make it bigger, better, faster, more. But
yep.
You could do it. So especially, I love the earlier point about, we don't want to customize this thing to the nth degree. That is the opposite of joy right now. We want to leverage this thing as much as we can out of the box, which is going to necessitate some changing. And again, I think everybody needs to feel engaged that we're going to be a part of this change. We're going to transform, and it's good. But I think all more to the point that was made earlier is that we got to make that investment in training, because that's literally the thing that's going to make the adoption happen. It's going to be the face of the system that you just put into place. And if you don't get that adoption, if people are grumbling because they don't want to use something or it was presented incorrectly, it's death. And then you've just made $100 million investment that nobody's super happy with.
Yep, and you can, and you know, it can have a material effect. There was I saw an article go by, I think just a couple of months ago, about a biomedical company that was reporting a material effect. I think it was like 2%. That's 2% impact on their bottom line that they attributed to challenges with their ERP implementation and the effect that it was having on production and shipping. And those are going to be, user affecting and affected activities. 35 years into our collective ERP journey, there are still organizations that struggle coming out of these projects, and we'd like to help ensure that doesn't happen. So.
Awesome. So I think we've probably found the closing point of this conversation, but I'd love for you guys to kind of give maybe some parting words, maybe encouragement or some pitfalls potentially to look out for besides some of the ones that we've already mentioned. Why don't we start with David and we'll finish.
Yeah, well, the good news is this can be done. We work with many companies that go through the struggle that any complex, highly involving activity, a transformation requires, and everyone comes out successful at the end. We've worked with many organizations that have achieved their business goals. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. No need for despair.
But there's a chance. Exactly.
But what's the expression? Failing to plan is planning to fail. It really requires laying the groundwork early on, thinking through what you're going to need to do, not just from a system perspective, but from a process and and people perspective, and plan early for your sustainment in activities, so that it's not just you flip a switch and we're done, but you're creating the foundation for your entire business going forward.
I mean, I think overall, most organizations that undertake these types of projects, it's an amazing opportunity for a lot of people. It's a lot of work, but you find out a lot about yourself. You find out a lot about kind of best in class and where you want to be. You're learning about new technology. So I think overall, it's a very exciting time. And I think it's just really important that as we look at kind of, the SAP space, in order for us to make sure that that journey has less obstacles, right? Because there's going to be things that are challenges. It's just, it's human nature, right? We're dealing with people and technology. We just have to make sure that we're planning enough time, effort, resource, budget, and the right activities and tasks to really make sure that we're driving adoption and we're driving success. To David's point, we have a lot of successful customers. We've been a part of a lot of great projects. And we just want to make sure that we're taking everything that we have learned and making the next crew of customers just as successful.
Awesome. No, I think, and to your earlier point, SAP is usually way more than just SAP. And, I think one of the things that makes me super confident about the crew that we've got assembled is we mentioned AI earlier. There was some mentioning of the data estate. There's cloud technologies, there's infrastructure, there's all kinds of things, even devices that'll be involved to this. And I think, having a partner like Insight that has all of those things that they can bring together, it makes it that much more compelling. Not that it isn't compelling in and of itself, but I think, again, that's something that makes me more comfortable, because usually, to your point, people get in a little over their heads for some things they didn't plan for, and to have to go out and try to find another partner to help them with that is, only costing time and, the success of the implementation. Well, thanks, you guys. We may come back and talk about the s'mores. Pretty awesome. And for those of you out there that are commenting and sending stuff in, we appreciate that a lot. If you want to know more about what we do, please visit us at insight.com. Thanks so much.